Welcome to Home Cook Stories, the podcast that brings flavor and inspiration to your ears. I'm your host, Julia Darling, a working mother with a family of 5 to feed and an insatiable appetite for all things food. Inspired by the life lessons from my mom, I believe food has profound links to our lives, from family recipes that leave a legacy, to the culinary journeys that define our travels, and the food that shapes our culture and lifestyle. Join me on this audio adventure as we dig into delicious topics, bringing more meaning and connectivity to our lives. And yes, we'll definitely work up an appetite. Remember, food isn't just what's on your plate. It helps tell the story of who you are. So wherever you are in this moment, pull up a seat and tune in, because life's too short for bland stories and boring meals. Welcome to Home Cook Stories. There's something about fall that begs us to slow down. The air is starting to turn crisp. The days will inevitably get shorter. My sweaters and my turtlenecks are calling my name because they are so excited their time has arrived. And suddenly, the kitchen feels like the heart of the home again. We're starting to spend a little bit more of our time indoors, and the kitchen is where we naturally all congregate. And I am a self-proclaimed fall fanatic, not so much on the pumpkin spice everything and starting in August, but I naturally love the seasons of transition because you just sense that change is in the air, and our senses are heightened once again to the smells of things like warming spices, wood-burning fires, and cozy chenille socks. What better way to lean into that cozy rhythm than with a loaf of homemade bread? Now, before you picture complicated steps and flour everywhere in your kitchen and just chaos, I promise you I am not signing you up for a weekend-long project. This isn't about adding one more thing on your already long to-do list. Rather, it's about creating a little moment for yourself, a ritual that can help you feel grounded and comforted. And honestly, nothing makes me feel like more of a badass than when I am pulling out a homemade loaf of bread that I have made with both of my hands that I can serve to the people that I love. In this episode, we are going to talk about why fall is the perfect season to bake, the benefits of making your own bread. I promise you, if you've never tried it before, it is easier than you think. And I'll share 3 types of bread recipes with you, one for pita, focaccia, and a simple white loaf that anyone can master, and you won't need fancy equipment or tons of skill. By the end, you won't just have ideas. You'll have 3 recipes you can apply to your real-life schedule in a way that fits your time and tastes. So let's cozy up to fall, savor the process, and rise to the occasion in the kitchen. Before we jump in, just a quick reminder, if you're enjoying this podcast, please be sure to hit follow or subscribe wherever you are listening. That way you'll never miss an episode, and you'll always have a little inspiration waiting for you when you need it most. Now, let's get the flour, the water, and the yeast because we are diving into bread baking right now. So why is fall such a good time to bake bread? And for me, there are really 3 big reasons. Number 1, fall just invites coziness. The weather cools down, the leaves are starting to turn. Our street is lined with maple trees, and they change into this beautiful deep red, and it just lines the entire street in that color, and I love it. And suddenly, also in the kitchen, having the oven on feels comforting instead of sweltering and like open up a window because it is getting way too hot in here. There's just nothing better than that warm smell of fresh bread filling your kitchen while it's crisp outside. Bread almost becomes part of the atmosphere, and it feels like fall in the form of food. Nothing makes me feel more empowered in the kitchen. There are probably 2 things that make me feel so empowered in the kitchen and so proud of myself, and that is roasting a chicken and baking a loaf of bread. And these are 2 things that I think are naturally perceived as being difficult to do or require a lot of time or a certain amount of skill. But in reality, they could not be more simple to execute, depending on the recipe that you're using. Perhaps it's also because these are items, a loaf of bread or rotisserie chicken that are readily available in our supermarkets. We can just go and pluck one off the shelves and have it back home in 5 or 10 minutes. But bread is one of those basic comfort foods, and I think it just tastes so much better when it's made in your own kitchen. Number 2, Fall is a season for shifting rhythms. And while on a lot of levels, I feel like our life and our busyness just like ramps up in September and getting into October because we're finally in the swing of things with school schedules. We're now into the extracurricular activities during the week. There are work deadlines, certainly, as we get into the fourth quarter. Everybody's trying to get things off of their plate before the holidays. And speaking of the holidays, they are fast approaching. So baking bread works so well in this space because it forces you to pause and to slow down. And you really can't rush the rising process or the steps that you have to take to get from flour and water and yeast to a dough to rise to a baked bread. So it really helps you to focus your attention and energy on something that can't be rushed. And third, bread is this perfect mix of creativity and comfort. And, this season naturally turns us towards hearty, grounding foods. My crock pot will never be in more use throughout the entire year as it is in the fall and going into the winter. We're just craving nourishment and warmth. And I think bread fits right into it because it's not just practical, but you get to play with it. You can experiment with different flours or different shapes. So there's both an art and a science to baking bread or just baking in general, which I think is what makes it really fun and satisfying. So these are all the reasons why I think fall is such a sweet spot for baking. It's not just about adding one more thing to your to-do list. Goodness knows, none of us need any of that. It's really about just leaning into the season and what it's about and being able to create something with your hands in the kitchen and letting the process be just as rewarding as the final loaf that you pull out of the oven. So before we get into the individual recipes, let's talk about the benefits of baking your own bread at home. When you bake bread at home, you're starting with the basics. Simple, whole ingredients: flour, water, yeast, maybe a little bit of salt, maybe some herbs, but that's it. There's no preservatives. There's no ingredients you can't pronounce. There's nothing hiding in the labels. I found it interesting as I've become more cognizant of reading the labels and seeing what is in the food that I'm buying for my family. Even buying bread from the bakery in a grocery store has some element of preservatives in it, or sometimes items that I don't even know of or can't even pronounce. And so this is a really surefire way of being able to bake something simple and wholesome, and everything that goes into it. Then there's the emotional benefit. And baking bread, I find to be honestly therapeutic. There is something about using your hands to make something, to knead the dough. It requires patience as you wait for the dough to rise, but also I love watching the process and seeing it expand and seeing it grow. And then there's the magic of pulling it out of the oven and slicing into it for the first time. It just can bring such enthusiasm and excitement from the whole family as to what we've made and then be able to enjoy it together. It slows you down and it gives you this sense of accomplishment. You literally created something from nothing, and it just fills the whole home with good smells and good vibes. The house feels warmer and more inviting just because there's bread in the oven. And finally, I think another benefit of bread is the family piece. Bread just has this way of bringing people together. The kids love to tear into those warm pitas and scoop it up with hummus or tzatziki. They want to watch the process themselves. It just creates these little shared moments and memories in the kitchen, even in these smallest of acts. It's about the experience of making it and sitting down together and enjoying something homemade. So yes, bread feeds us, and I could not live without it. It is one of my favorite food groups. But it also nourishes us in these other ways: our health, our emotions, our connections to one another. And that's what makes baking it at home feel so special. So let me share, before we get into the individual recipes themselves, why I picked these particular breads. There's a white loaf, a focaccia, and a pita for this episode. I really wanted to give you a variety, and I felt like each one of these has its own distinct personality and technique. The classic white loaf feels just timeless and cozy, and you can use for anything and everything. the focaccia that I love. It's just got that rustic look to it, and it's perfect for topping with herbs or serving with your Italian dinners. And then the pita bread, which is fun. And it's so interactive because you're using your hands to shape the pita themselves. And then you get to see the pockets puff up in the oven. It's highly interactive. I also wanted to make sure that these recipes felt effortless for you. I remember the first time I was trying to make a sourdough bread from a starter, and I had so many notes and charts about when to make it and the timing and the temperature. And we do not have time for that nowadays. So I wanted to make sure that these recipes that I'm sharing were approachable. And so anyone, whether you are a bread baking novice or somebody that is a little bit more sophisticated and you are making your own sourdough, but there's something for everybody here. So no matter your comfort level, you can just dive right in. Another thing I kept in mind was the equipment. So these recipes don't require a ton of special tools. You can adapt them to whatever you already have in your kitchen. And I like these particular recipes as well because it will tell you how to make the bread based on what you have. So whether you have an electric hand mixer or you have that stand mixer, whether you have a thermopin to test the temperature of your water, or you just need to use your finger to test it. I really do like that all of these recipes can speak to both ends of the spectrum in terms of the equipment that you have or don't have at home. And I love that you can measure these recipes however you prefer. So whether that's by weight in grams, if you like the precision, or if you don't have a scale in your kitchen, you can certainly use cups and teaspoons and those types of measurements if you feel that that is easier for you. I do have a small scale in my kitchen, and so I wanted to be able to use it for a change and to see how it turned out. But I think either way you go, you can't go wrong. Timing wise, also, I felt this was really important. These recipes are very flexible. You can totally make them on a slow weekend, but they can also fit into your weekday. If you start in the morning or the afternoon and you want a fresh loaf by dinner, there's a lot of different options based on how much time you have to give and how much time you need to spread your bread baking out. So it's about doing this in a way that works for your life and your schedule and your kitchen. So variety, simplicity, flexibility, that's what these recipes bring to the table. And that's exactly why I chose them. All right, so the first recipe I'm going to talk about with you is King Arthur's recipe for an English muffin toasting bread. That is King Arthur's English muffin toasting bread. You can Google it and find it on their website. It is out there right now for you. It was actually suggested by a good friend of mine. We were having coffee together one morning, and I was talking to her about my theme for this episode and some of the different recipes I hoped to highlight. And she recommended this one to me, and I fell in love with it for all of the reasons that she said I would. It's such a gem. And don't let the name fool you. It's kind of quite interesting, in my opinion. It is not a recipe for English muffins. It is a white loaf of bread that is soft and pillowy, and it perhaps has a little bit of the English muffin texture. But this is really, think about your white bread sandwich loaf. It is perfect for that. It is also perfect for just having for toast in the morning, which is how I used it. I would have a slice in the morning and slather it up with a little salted butter and some jam, and it was just heavenly. So simple, but so delicious. My kids also loved this one because it feels familiar and comforting. And I love that because it's basically no fail, you guys. You are mixing everything together, dumping it in the loaf pan, putting it in the oven, and taking it out about 20 to 30 minutes later. So it's one of those breads that you can bake once, and I think you will find that it suddenly becomes part of your regular rotation. The one thing that I'll note here, where it may get a little technical, is when you are combining milk and water and oil. And they want you to bring those liquid ingredients to a certain temperature, but they don't want it to get above 140 degrees. So this is where I was talking about if you have a thermopin like I did at home, that's what I used to test the temperature of the liquids before adding it to the yeast, because that's what they're really concerned about, is making sure that the temperature range doesn't harm the yeast when you're mixing it together. But I'll go ahead and tell on myself. My liquid temperature got above 140 degrees. It heats up quite quickly. And so if that happens, do not panic. Pour it out of the hot pan into a bowl, stir it, just let it sit on the counter for several minutes. It will start to cool down to a point where you can mix it with the yeast, and then you are good to go. All right, on to the next. This is focaccia from a food blog called Alexandra's Kitchen. And the website for that is alexandracooks.com. This is for a refrigerated overnight focaccia recipe. And I think it's called the best, easiest focaccia bread recipe if you want to Google it. And that is exactly what it is. Focaccia, certainly from its looks, feels like the showstopper of this group. And I have always wanted to sink my fingers into that dough to create those iconic dimples that you see in all of the videos and the tutorials. So this one is highly satisfying. It also could not be easier. And what I really love about this recipe from Alexandra's Kitchen is that you mix the dough together and then you actually refrigerate it overnight. So it's perfect of like, hey, I want to get started and do a little bit on day one, but then I am going to finish it on day two when I have the time. You can. And in fact, you can leave the dough in that refrigerator for up to 3 days. So if it's one of those where you put it in the refrigerator and life happens and you can't get to it until the next day, this recipe is very forgiving and is still going to turn out beautifully. So this one, my children loved. My youngest had this focaccia. We sliced it up for breakfast in the morning. She took some to school with her to pack in her lunch, and she would have it when she came home as a snack. We topped it with rosemary and some flaky sea salt, and it was just everything you would expect your focaccia to be. So happy I found this recipe because now I feel like I have the skill and the knowledge to make focaccia at home. Last, but certainly not least, is a recipe for pita bread from Samin Nosrat's new book, Good Things. If I were to pick out of the 3 bread recipes that I have shared with you, what was perhaps the most involved from a time commitment and somewhat a skill level, it would be this one for pita. But at the same time, this is also the recipe that gave me the biggest payoff. And I'll tell you why. I can specifically remember a time when my parents came to visit us in North Carolina, and I wanted my mom to show me how to make this Lebanese flatbread that I remember her mom making and my mom making growing up. And I wanted her to teach me because, like a lot of ethnic cooking, you have to see in order to do. She doesn't follow a recipe. You just kind of had to watch her and to learn and to hopefully write it down. The thing that I remembered most about watching my mom teach me how to make that Lebanese flatbread was her hands. And that it was really more around the technique that she showed me and how she used her hands to work the dough, to make the right shape. I remember her, stretching it out to show me the right level of transparency that you're looking for as you're massaging the dough out with your hands. And so much of that brought back fond memories as I was making these pitas for my family, and it just brought me right back to that moment with her. I love this recipe, not only because it tastes good, but just because there was so much memory tied to it as well. You can use this for pita sandwiches. You can use it to scoop up dips. You could even potentially use it for a base of personal pita pizzas. It's flexible. I will tell on myself once again, just to show you that this is cooking in real life of a home cook in her own kitchen. So I way overproofed the first rise of this dough. It was only supposed to sit for 1.5 to 2 hours. As life sometimes happens on a Sunday, I sat the dough in my laundry room because you're looking for a warm room. And I sat it down there and walked away and found myself then becoming obsessed and consumed with cleaning out our playroom. So 4 hours, maybe even 5 hours later, I remembered there's pita bread to be made. And I remember my oldest daughter saying, "Are you going to bake the pita today, or are you not going to do it?" And part of me was like, well, that was ruined. I let it go for too long. And then the other part of me thought, you know what? What do we have to lose? We're going to make it. If it turns out great, wonderful. We learned something. It's kind of foolproof. And if it doesn't, well, then we learned something either way. So we continued to go with it. And the pitas actually turned out beautifully. And what's so fun about the pitas in particular is that each one has its own distinct look. At least in mine, no two pitas looked the same. They were both cooked to the same level of perfection and doneness, but I had different shapes. Some were long, some were more circles, some were fatter, some were thinner. But that's what I've thought made them so interesting in seeing how each one was unique. This was not the British baking show on the technical challenge where we want 12 identical pita pockets. Do not get discouraged as you're making these pitas if they don't all look the same. They will taste delicious. Your family will be so impressed, and you will be so proud of yourself too, because this one is just really joyous, both to make and to eat. And it doesn't take long. We're talking 2 to 4 minutes each from the time that you put them in the oven until the time that you take it out. And it's so satisfying to watch them puff up and rise in the oven. So there you go. Those are my 3 recipes that I would recommend you start baking this fall. Whether you are pulling together a weeknight pita, you're making a focaccia to impress your friends or your family, or you just want to bake a simple loaf of white bread for toast or sandwiches throughout the week. I hope this episode gave you permission to slow down, enjoy the process, and be more mindful of the change in the season. And if you do bake one of these breads, I would love to hear about it. Share your favorite recipe with me, tag me on Instagram, or send me an email. Who knows? Maybe your go-to bread recipe will be featured in a future episode. And until we talk again, here's to slowing down, savoring the fall season, and feeling like a total bread badass in the kitchen. Thank you all for listening to the episode today. If you find value in these stories, please share it with someone who would appreciate it too. A big part of why I wanted to start this podcast is to build a community of food lovers and home cooks alike. You taking less than a minute out of your day to share an episode, subscribe to the podcast, or leave a review is the greatest form of validation and means so much because it is helping us to build that community and connection with one another. Remember, a good story is meant to be shared. Until next time, eat well.